Welcome to Powered by Podio. Automation is everything. Supercharge your business with Podio. Get ready for another episode of Supercharged with Jordan Samuel Fleming, your weekly dive into the awesome impact workflow and automation can have on your business when it's powered by Podio. Join us each week as we learn from the top Podio partners in the world, as we investigate system integrations and add-ons, and hear from real business owners who have implemented Podio into their business. Now, join your host, Jordan Samuel Fleming, CEO of Game Changers, for this week's episode.
Hey everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Supercharged. I'm your host, Jordan Samuel Fleming, here to talk all about the power of workflow and automation when your business is powered by Podio. Now, this week I am joined by Matt Bailey from Bailey Real Estate, and Matt is a really interesting case. His business buys and sells land, not houses, but land, and because of that, it's a very process-driven business. There's a lot of steps that need to be done, from due diligence to contacts to applications and forms that need to be filled in, details to be checked, etc. And we talk a bit about how he developed his Podio system and how he's brought a lot of that process into Podio, and that journey of kind of building it, figuring it out, helping to refine the process, etc. And one of the things that we focus on is communication, because communication, of course, in most businesses, but particularly in real estate, when you're trying to communicate across sellers, buyers, and of course the different departments that you may be interacting with in terms of getting permissions, etc., having proper communication fully integrated is a really, really powerful thing. And we worked very closely with Matt's team to bring both, of course, phone calls and text messages, but also emails into their system. And we talk a little about what that journey was like for both Matt and the team, of some of maybe the disruption that happened, the ways we had to adjust and tweak the process to get it right and working for them, but also about how the team was able to, see the benefits and the payoffs of integrating that communication and what it brings to them. It's a really interesting episode because we get to dive into the way Podio can really interact with you via processes, the way it can manage processes, the way it can help guide teams into doing steps in the right way, and the way that by integrating communications properly, you can really streamline and have transparency and visibility all around it. It's great chat. Matt and I get to catch up a little. We talk a bit about Podio concepts, as well as getting into these sort of more intricate details around communication. And I think people will really be able to get a lot of knowledge from Matt's journey in Podio and the way his system has developed over time. So let's dive right in. So but easy conversation. Let's start off by actually, I always like to start off by asking everybody how they found Podio in the beginning.
Yeah.
So, how did you find it?
So I found Podio. I was, doing real estate investing, and I needed some sort of a CRM to keep everything intact. The kind of real estate investing I do is similar to house wholesaling, where it's just highly transactional, and you're doing a lot of deals. And you need some way to keep tabs on everything. Like a shared Google sheet or like an Airtable or something is just not going to cut it. So I tried a couple of different platforms before I found Podio. And I really like Podio because it's super customizable. That's like something that was really important to me. I'm big on procedures and doing everything in a certain kind of way. And there are other, real estate investing platforms like, that use Podio. But they weren't customizable to like what I needed. So I just like the ability to set everything up exactly. So, I do land investing. We buy and sell, parcels of vacant land. And it's not quite the same as all the house guys. So, we needed more specific process and procedures, and I like that customization. And then when you combine that with GlobiFlow, the processes you can create and the workflows are just really, really, beneficial, and you can leverage so much time savings through all of that.
Give me, I think that the time the time saving element of the workflow automation is something that I think people don't. I think they underestimate sometimes just how much what I would class as grunt work you can have the system do. So,
Hmm.
like, give me a little sense about the types of ways a workflow automation built on Citrix PWA, aka Globiflow. Um, uh, Give me some examples of those and how they're helping.
Yeah, so like I said, we're highly transactional. So last month we had, 15 properties that were actually, we had 21 properties coming in through acquisitions, and we had 15 in some level of dispositions or being sold or whatnot. So when you have that many properties going around, if you think, for instance, our transaction coordinator, her job is to try to get properties through the closing process, either buying or selling as efficiently as possible. So she gets a ton of documents, and she's got to save preliminary title reports, and she's got to save settlement statements and all sorts of different things. So whenever those documents come in, she can hit a button that says, preliminaries title report has been received. She hits that button. We put in the title that she should label that as. So every single file gets the exact same title format. So it'll merge, the seller's last name, their parcel number, our reference number, and then it'll tell her, go ahead and save it. And, if we want to save to, for instance, Google Drive, we put that hyperlink. So it's just a clickable. It says G Drive. It's underlined. She can click it. It opens up in a new tab. She can save it there and close it. So she doesn't have to go, okay, now let me type in this title of the report's name is going to be title report. And what's the guy's last name and what's the parcel number and all that kind of stuff. It's just, hey, copy, paste, and you're done. And, it also, when those preliminary title reports come in, we'll double check that the taxes match what we've researched when we're doing our due diligence. So it'll pull the information that we pulled from that due diligence application that we have, and it'll put it right in front of her. And we'll say, hey, we're expecting to see $500 a year for taxes and $700 of delinquent taxes. And if she looks at her title report and it says there's $2,000 of delinquent taxes, she knows there's a disconnect, but she doesn't have to navigate away from her page. She can just have it pop up in front of her. Everything looks good. Copy, paste the name, save it, click done, and that kind of stuff. Like, it seems so easy. Like, yeah, I'll just title it with the preliminary title report and the guy's name. But that stuff adds up when you're doing, she's managing, if you add those two numbers up, 35 transactions a month, either in or out. And you can be so much more efficient if you can just have that information placed in front of you than if you got to put it together. And you're right. People underestimate how much time savings that actually is. Cause it's like, what? It's 2 seconds. I'll just do it. But
Yeah,
it's 2 seconds times
it's
25.
the old adage of looking after the pennies and the well, in the UK, you look after the pennies, the pounds take care of themselves. Or the dollars, I guess it would be a more relevant one.
Mm-hmm.
But it's amazing how much little incremental things add up, so that at the end of the month, if you've saved 15 hours at the end of the month where you can execute other things or whatever it is, that is an enormous thing. And you're doing it by little teeny, it's not like you're saving 45 minutes each time on a task. You're saving those little bits of time that just not only make your day easier, but also makes the task flow easier for what you're doing. And I know in your system, you are a very process oriented guy. And so you've sort of got a very linear type of a structure to your Podio. Where you've got such defined processes, how, was it that ability to sort of map things out on a linear view as they pass through apps that really first got you hooked? Is that kind of how you came to it?
Yeah. So, I was able to kind of recognize pretty early on that this kind of highly transactional type of real estate investing, as opposed to maybe some people who are flippers, they're, maybe doing 1 or 2 properties a month or a quarter or whatever. It's not quite as important to have so much process, but with what I'm doing is you need to do volume. If you're not doing like 5, 10 more deals per month, just kind of your monthly recurring costs kind of eat up things. So, when I was doing it, I started just needing process so that I could very quickly do my checklist and then be done, and make sure I didn't miss any steps and not be thinking like, oh, am I sure that I got everything? So I started really documenting my processes. And then once I realized, okay, this needs to be, that higher volume, I need to get this outsourced to people. I again took those processes that I made for myself, really tightened them up, and then I was able to hand that to somebody else. And when you want someone else to be doing those activities for you, like I trust my team to make good decisions, but at the same time, the more structure you can provide somebody, I think it helps them, right? If they're just sitting there doing, I think this is how I'm supposed to do it, versus just being able to go back, look at our procedure, or follow a process in Podio. I think that really helps people out. So that's kind of, I think if you're going to start outsourcing things, the simpler you can make it for people, the better. And through your procedures and through Podio workflow, like, click this button, then click the following buttons, and then it's done. And they don't have to worry about whether or not they did it right because it prompted them with a checklist. That kind of stuff makes it really powerful, I think.
Yeah. And I think, it's interesting. The thing that occurred to me while we were talking about that is, back in the day, I used to do a lot of work in franchising, and, a successful franchise, and even one where the output of that franchise may seem like quite a high end thing or whatever, right? Like a food franchise where you go in and it's not just a Burger King or I don't mean disrespect to Burger King or KFC, but where it's a restaurant chain, but the fact is that there's a process there that you can run to make sure that it looks the same, it acts the same, it tastes the same, the quality is the same, and there's and that when you do that and you do that well, you're giving people the blueprint for success. You're giving people the guided experience of how you can make this restaurant greatly successful by just following the steps. And when with the type of business model you're in, which I think is also the same for wholesaling, although
they're very parallel for sure.
Possibly not as much due diligence done at the wholesale level as I think I've gathered from your system. It's still that method of, if I give you this you follow this every time, then we'll be able to get through this efficiently, quickly. We'll be able to maximize how much we can do, make as much money as we can, and make sure that the quality of what our output is consistent. And that's really an area where Podio can shine.
For sure. And I think another thing that's really nice about having well-defined procedures that people also overlook is through management. If somebody follows a procedure and we don't get the outcome we want, it's really nice just to be able to say, all right, it's the procedure's fault. Let's go update the procedure. Versus, if they miss a step, you can say, hey, can you double check how this procedure works? And if it doesn't have this step, go ahead and add it. And then they can go back to the procedure. And I think they'll recognize like, ooh, yeah, I skipped that step, and there's like a little bit less of like, hey, you didn't do this the way that I thought you were going to do it. Because it's all pretty much outlined exactly how you're supposed to do it. And I think that a lot of people kind of, if you don't have those procedures, there's a lot of middle ground for, was it done correctly? Whereas if stuff is really well defined and if it's in Podio, for instance, we'll have like a category field that is basically just a checklist, like, do this and 1, 2, 3, 4, and they click on each one of those when those are accomplished. And if you've clicked all those buttons, then you've, checked the document thoroughly and it's done. So I think, when you add all that process, that accountability kind of takes care of itself. And that kind of like reframing of like how you want a job done, it just doesn't happen because you have that process and you have it built into your system.
How do you balance? I think though, the one danger area that I think is potentially possible with a system or what you're describing in Podio is the potential to over-engineer, to restrictively engineer a process in Podio where you are either causing that there's too much information that they have to navigate through and do all these things, or you're restricting their ability to actually go with the flow of of reality, because sometimes, sadly, shit doesn't happen the way the process says we want it to happen. It just doesn't work like that. And you find yourself sometimes being restricted by a system that doesn't allow you to do X, Y, and Z. I had this experience the other day where I was trying to verify something in the US, and they wouldn't let me swap the order of my verified IDs. And it was like, and the system just said no, and they're like, and you had to stop, and like the whole world ground was stopped for something so stupid it wasn't even funny. How do you, or how have you approached, how's your insight changed? How have you developed it over time, in the balance between the human, the process, the Podio architecture? How has that evolved as you've been doing this?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because I am super heavy on the process. I want everything documented. I want to know exactly how you're doing it. And then, if you are following that process, I can then go back and look at that process and go, oh, well, this should be a click in an automation. And then I can save you time there. So like the more detailed that my team can be in keeping those procedures up to date, the more effective I can be in making their lives easier and adding automation and systematization. That's not a word. Systemization. So, I started with putting everything into a process, right? And the one area where I found it doesn't make a lot of sense to do that is for our acquisition managers, the people who are talking to the sellers who call in and want to sell their property. Because it's a live phone call, right? That call is going to go in one direction. You can't be like, no, you have to answer the last question I wanted you to answer. So what I've done is I think that I've tried to let our people know which fields have to be filled in and why they have to be filled in. So there's certain fields that our acquisition managers really do need to get, because our transaction coordinator or the person doing due diligence needs to, for instance, know who are we talking to and how are they related to the person trying to sell the property? Like, do they actually have the authority to sell the property? Are we talking to a gatekeeper? Are we talking to the right person? Do we need to go through probate or courts because somebody's deceased? So I let our acquisitions people know, okay, these fields you really do got to fill in. But for instance, on that acquisition, they fill out a little bit of a questionnaire before they call the people. And that's like, look up the property, check out the topography. Does it have access? These are like basic things that you need to know just to sound educated when you're talking to somebody on the phone about the property that they own. You need to check these things. And for instance, if there's red flags, you need to bring that up so that when you call me in to say, okay, here's the seller, here's our situation, what's our offer price going to be? I don't want to have to be like, well, did you ask them about the access issue? That's part of their checklist, is check the access. And if there's an issue, it'll prompt them to say, make sure, so that they know, okay, I better talk about this access issue, so that I don't have to ask Matt for an offer price. And then he's going to say, well, you didn't finish the access part of the process. So go call him back and get that question cleared up for me. So there's certain questions that they have to fill out that will make sure that they don't miss things on the call, so that when they come to me, I have a full picture. I can just give them an answer and we move on. But what I used to have is all of those questions they'd ask would then sort of populate the script down below. Like, here's all the questions you should ask and what you should say to make sure that those things happen. And I have a coach who, I was talking to, and I was like frustrated because these acquisitions managers or, maybe weren't filling in everything exactly how I wanted. And he's like, man, you hired this person because they're really good at talking to people on the phone and like building that trust and having that kind of conversation to get people, interested in selling their property. He's like, you hired people, but you want them doing process. He's like, they're just those kinds of people. They're not hardwired like that. There's process people, there's, people, there's decision making. So like, when we hire, we use, disc profiles and personality assessments, and quite literally the type of person you want, like a salesman type person, is not the kind of person who does checklists. They go, they hunt, they get deals
In
done,
fact,
they get to the next
it's on
deal.
the opposite quadrant.
It's exactly in the opposite quadrant, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like, I'm upset that the person who I hired because they're excellent at one thing is not excellent at the thing that they're supposed to not be excellent at, right? So, okay, so what I did is I backed off there and I said, okay, these are the fields that you need because they link to other fields in Podio, and they're also really important for making sure that the deal gets done properly. Fill out your checklist before you call somebody, but all that other stuff, like, don't worry about it. So I think it's important to know what is required and where you want to flag people and notify them in the process. and also what really isn't important, and kind of like separate those two. And so that's kind of been my path of like over putting too much process in and then backing it off to saying, okay, these are the ones that we need because they loop back into the system and they're the ones that make people's lives easier. So make sure those get done. These ones are optional to help you if you want to fill them in to remember things, but you don't need to do them.
Well, and as I think it's a good point about the sort of, if you've got someone who's a really good salesperson and connects to people and can develop a good rapport in that way, you also, it's great if you can close every deal on one call. That doesn't always happen, and it often usually doesn't. There's rapport building. There's all these things that don't fit into structured boxes. And, I always think is what is the outcome I'm really looking for here? Like, if the outcome I'm looking for is first and foremost, let's make sure this person gets this person warm, like keeps the lead warm and happy and gets them so rolled over. We can have a follow-up call, or he can say, hey, great, I can't wait to move forward. I just need to get a few bits of details off you once you've established a relationship. What are the outcomes you want? And if you're slavishly trying to tell people, no, you need to get here, you need to use these steps to get this outcome, it's not always going to work, which is what you're describing.
Yeah, precisely. So what I'm trying to do with our system now, and it's always evolving, is I'm just trying to figure out what are the must-haves. What exactly, do I need to, what boxes need to be checked for me to, purchase a property, close on it, feel good about whatever. And I'm making sure that those are put front and center so that before we check off an item that it's fully complete, we just have the summary that says, hey, do we fill all of these things that if we miss one, we might run into a problem? And then the rest of the stuff is kind of, beneficial and helpful. But I think kind of having that clear delineation of before this is done, before we can send a wire to purchase a property, we need all of these boxes checked.
But also,
I think that's the ticket.
I also I want to follow up with that bit as well as a sort of offshoot of that conversation, because I know, because obviously you and I know each other because we work together. We've so I do know your system a little. I'm not nearly as educated on it as other members of my team, but I know it a little. And I know that one of, to me, a great offshoot of what you've just described is great, fill in these boxes because we need this information. But that's also an area where starting to better integrate your communication streams with people will make sure that information is trackable in a way that is easily accessible as well. And I of course have a vested interest in people in linking their phone systems into Podio, but also of course email and to me, communication streams being tracked within Podio. It's just one other way of making sure that our boxes are checked, our information's readily available, it's efficient because I can see the history, etc. Now that's a process you're working through right now. Mm-hmm. How is that? There's good, there's bad, there's ugly, there's difficulties bits, there's frictional bits. How has that been approached? How's that been going? What have you been finding in terms of that? The good and the bad.
Yeah. So I think it's super important to be able to get that communications into Podio. Leaving Podio to go to Gmail to find an email, and then you get a different email and you got to go find it. Okay, who's this supposed to belong to? Which application does it belong to? Which item in that application does it belong to? Then you open it up. It's just, there's a lot of back and forth between communication systems that used to exist that I think is now getting, a lot more streamlined. It's just nice to open up an item, see where you're at, hit the email button, shoot someone an email, and then that email is automatically uploaded to an activity log. So we do an activity log where, each email or each text or whatever communication kind of just streams through there. And it looks like, a Facebook feed or whatever, just of all of your different communications kind of integrated into one multi-line text field. And that's been super helpful. I think that every time something new clicks with communications for my team, they're really stoked about it. So when we first started doing emails, I think the way that it was set up that you had, it wasn't exactly the same way that like my team uses emails. So we had a little pivot there and a couple of nuances, right? Because you're doing email and Podio. It's like Gmail is like super duper, you know, Ferrari of email stuff, right? So
100%.
people are so used to it, it's got everything. But like really what we need
as well. Like it's not the you're either there's going to be frictional change between whizzing around Gmail and doing the email in Podio. There has to be.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, people are so used to Gmail, so used to following these habits for emails that they've used forever. When you get over into Podio, it's like, okay, you got to unlearn one or two things because of how Podio integrates together. But then once it clicks, I think everybody's really kicking a lot of butt right now. And it's really nice to have all of those emails and texts and everything just be in one place. We're trying to, it's one of those things where you got to like rip the Band-Aid off. You just got to dive full into email with Podio and then you figure it out. There's a little bit of a learning curve. But now everything is so efficient. It's like all your emails are in the right place. I can like check anybody's emails. Like our transaction coordinator she was out Thursday, Friday, and then Monday, and she'll be back late this evening. But I was able to just go into the email app, see her emails. One or two things were stuff that I could sign and get done, that was time dependent stuff. Everything else can wait for her. So I hit those items and then we just keep rolling. So it's nice to have everybody kind of in one place. And as those emails come in, they automatically go to the right application. So if I, am supposed to follow up on something, I can open up that thing and I can see, oh, well, an email came in, and I can see it, even though it wasn't sent to me, it's on that item and I can see, okay, this is where we're at in the process. So I think, integrating text, call, email, it's one of those huge leverage points, and we can trigger those inbound emails or, triggering other notifications for people. It's just really something else to be able to get it all in there.
What's really pleasing to me about this is it wasn't easy. And I know that sounds dumb, but I think, your story there is a really instructive one about not powering through, because that's not the right way to look at it. Like it's not about just like putting your head down and powering through on something, but it is about understanding that a change of system is going to be friction to people. Any change of system, whether you're coming into Podio from something else or whether you're changing something as fundamental to our lives for the last 15 friggin' years as email, right? I know, and I watched you guys go through this, and I wondered whether you'd get at the other end of on the other end in the way that I hoped you would, because of course I believe 100% in integrating these communication streams to Podio. I live it every day, but I also know it's not as easy as just being like, oh, well, it's set up now, so therefore everything's going to be perfect and everybody thinks, everything's going to be roses, etc. But you guys fought through that in a sense and made tweaks. This isn't quite right. Let's adjust it how we want. Great, because everybody's different. But you've come out with a way of integrating these communication streams that's giving you the outcomes of transparency, visibility, of clean efficiency of linking things to the right things. And you've approached it. You found a hurdle. You got around the hurdle by adjusting the process in the right way and adjusting the system that we'd set up the way we do it, and it just didn't work quite right. Now it's setting up the way you do it. So I really love that, because it shows that it's not about powering through, but it is about understanding. We know the outcome is that we want this. How do we be flexible to find our way? And you guys had that experience, I think, particularly with email.
Yeah, for sure. I think something that helps there is obviously like huge shout out to my team. They, troop through it because they're, for instance, our acquisition people, they like depend on email and, constant contact with people. So like, I think for them, they're trying to close deals, they're commissions based. It's like, if I don't get this email and I don't talk to this guy, maybe we lose that deal or something. Right. So it's really important to them. But at the same time, I think that, like I said, shout out to them for hanging in there through like kind of the growth. It's certainly one of those like one step back for 2, 3, 4 forward, because it's so much better when it's done. but they had kind of seen that a little bit when we, switched over to smartphone too, right? So we had an old phone system. It was working fine. Everybody knows how to use a VoIP system. And now I'm like, okay, well, we're using a different one. It's integrated here. These calls are coming through. And, you work through that just a little bit. And now they're like, oh, I love just being able to send a text in the comments bar, and stuff like that. So my team, I think that they have a lot of faith that when I tell them, hey, this is going to be worth it, this automation or whatever, they always see that reward eventually. Right. So we'll change a process and they'll be like, okay, what's going on here? But then a month later, it's like all ironed out and they're like, yeah, this is great. This is so helpful. So I think that they kind of knew that, me buying into it was probably a sign that like, hey, when we do figure this thing out, it's going to be, a lifesaver. And I think that it has been. Just being able to integrate those communications is just so handy,
Well, and I think, community, if you're in any sort of sales role or, if your business sells or supports or has customers or has constituents of any type where you're going to communicate with them, which, let's be honest, is every business. I mean, unless you're, I don't know, selling things to androids somehow, the communication and understanding the history and understanding the whole picture of communication with someone is, I think, just so critical. And it's just, and where you are siloed into a bunch of systems, like I've got my phone system over here, I've got my email over here, I've got my CRM here. And if I remember to log that I made a call or take a note, great. But chances are I don't, because I'm working so fast. When it's siloed like that, I think it opens you up for just such bad relationship building capabilities. But if you get it right, where you can see it and you can, you see it, there's a problem, and then you can just look and see the whole communication stream of emails and texts and phone calls, and you can see the call notes and you can see the, and all that. It allows you a very clear and transparent view of the things that have happened. I see this sometimes on an acquisitions point of view, because I'll get people who say, my guys are telling me that they're making so many phone calls, but they're not logged in smartphone. What's going on, Jordan? And I'm like, they're not logged in smartphone. They're not making those calls, mate. Or they're using their cell phones or something. Cause and suddenly the guy suddenly sees the transparency that actually so-and-so is only making 10 calls a day. Cause I can see it. I can see the execution. And I think to me, that's one of the just most critical things.
Yeah, and you make a good point there. Being able to see that history is really helpful. So if I go into our acquisitions person and they say, hey, Matt, how much can we offer for this property? And I'm missing just a little bit of information, I can go through and look at a couple texts, look at a couple emails, and maybe get that information without having to get that acquisitions person on the phone or on, instant message or something and say, hey, what's going on? You asked this question. I can just kind of see it. The calls, obviously they got to log their call notes. So you can't see those. We have, recordings of certain calls so we can go back and listen to those. But being able to see texts and emails and a little bit more of the context without having to get other people involved to tell you that is pretty helpful. And one other thing that I kind of lost my train of thought, didn't round out that last thought about going through the growing pains, is you guys have been super helpful and super patient, because a lot of the issues that, my team runs into might just be very specific, Podio things, right? This is how automations work. It's maybe not quite fully intuitive, so that if you do a particular action, it's going to behave in a certain kind of way, because, there's text tags in those emails that link them to the right things. So, my team might be like, hey, I would have expected this email to be uploaded. And then we can just say, well, the reason it didn't happen is this. So, going through those growing pains, it's really nice. You guys have been super helpful and super patient. We try not to use you guys as tech support. If we're like, hey, we're not really sure what's going on, I try to get to the bottom of it for the simple stuff. But nevertheless, if we're having an issue, we just raise a ticket, you or Sandra, chime in, and we get to the bottom of it and just kind of iterate on everything. So, shout out to you guys for being super helpful and responsive, and also patient with us, because I'm sure some things are, you're like, it's like a very simple tech support thing that you guys are like, well, of course that makes sense, right? But for us on the other end, or my people,
I don't think
know.
we ever think like that. I think I'd say shout out to Sandra, Andrew, and Lenny, and Match of the team. Certainly, I don't get any shout outs on that side of things because they do such a great job. But I do. I think it does make an interesting. I without sounding self-serving, I do think that sometimes there is a benefit to getting involved and having a resource that can sanity check and that can give guidance on your Podio development sometimes. And with a lot of people, with some people with simple systems, everybody, you can learn it yourself, you can build it, great. But when you start trying to scale something, there are a network of Podio partners, of which we're just one, and people who really understand it. And I do think there are times when, it just makes sense, because you can then be like, hey, I want to try and achieve this. And then know that there's a team out there that can go, okay, well, given we've done this 250 times, we actually think you should think about it like this, or yeah, no problem. Here's how it can be done. And it can be a very fruitful partnership without being an overwhelming one either. And there's lots of people out there. Let me ask, obviously you integrate email and phone calls and text messages and all that. Are there, what do you feel is the next kind of integration element that you're going to be exploring? What do you feel like you're missing right now? In terms of your own system, you've obviously got good processes, you've got good people, you've integrated your communications. Where do you see, now that you're here, your next steps? Was your appetite taking you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. So over the last couple of months, we've really hired out all of our positions. So we've got 4 full-time, employees, and I've got, one family member helping out too. So that's really 5 different people who all have separate accountabilities. So now that we've really staffed everybody and everybody's more or less trained up in their role, the next stage is implementing, KPIs and things like that. So if you've read, Traction's a really good book for that type of stuff. I think that KPIs are the next thing that we need to do. Everybody right now has a general understanding of what their job is, why they're doing it, and like how they can help improve, right? And it's generally, we're trying to close deals more quickly, decrease our due diligence time, decrease our time doing being in escrow on properties. So I think that, we've already started to do this a little bit, is talking about KPIs and tracking. We have our aggregator app, which is like our CEO 20,000 foot view, like where am I needed? Where are things falling behind? So integrating all of those types of flags that get raised, if we're expecting something to happen in the transaction process and it hasn't happened by a week, to have a flag raised for our transactions person that says, hey, you should reach out to this escrow agent because she should have given you a document by now. So let's kind of hold their feet to the fire a little bit. But then just in general, for each role, it's important to have KPIs where you can track people and let them know, hey, you're hitting your numbers here, or this is taking too long. It also helps as an owner just to know, where we could make improvements. I'm never looking to point blame for these KPIs. It's more of an indication that things are going a little bit off the tracks, or balls are getting dropped. And then I see it as an opportunity for improvement. Where can we create a flag that lets somebody know, hey, this is too many days past due. I just want them to have that flag on their dashboard. I don't want to come in and be like, hey, you missed it again. Right. So those kind of KPIs and overall view is really the next stage, so that just for everyone else to have their own accountability, they can look at their dashboard and see where their KPIs are getting dropped and maybe suggest edits for themselves. What would make that not happen for them?
I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, actually, because I view KPIs in the same way I view process implementation in Podio, in that it is very easy to go too far and be restrictive and be, or be, like be that micro. It's not about being micromanager. It's what is valuable data versus what's just fucking data. And like great. I know that we're great. We're 1.8% down as of yesterday. Like, what are we talking about here? And I think KPIs is something that everybody talks about. And everybody, it's like a thing that, it's like, we gotta measure our KPIs. And I agree with that, by the way. I'm not against that. I agree with that. But I also always feel like there has to be an understanding of what are company KPIs that matter, what are personal KPIs that matter, i.e. what are company goal KPIs that really give us understanding and insight, and then what are role or personnel KPIs to make sure that that person is performing to their ability, that they can, or identifying weak points, identifying places for more training, etc. But there is a balance there, because you can go really silly very quickly. How do you feel like, where do you come in on that? Because it's an area that I do feel there's business owners run a lot of times way too far to the right, so to speak. And I'm gonna measure everything. And I think there's a balance. What are your thoughts on that?
So when you started, explaining that, I was ready to reply, and then I don't think I could do a better job than you did, where there is the two, right? Like, you explained that well. If people are unsure, they should rewind and listen to that again. There are the KPIs that tell the business, what is the business's health? What does that look like? Those are, I think, the really important KPIs. Then there's the management KPIs, right? So we would expect that, if we get a new seller lead, I would expect that our acquisitions people reply to that person within 24 hours, or 24, one business day, whatever. Same thing with transactions, right? We might be able to tell our transaction coordinator, we want all of our deals closed within 30 days. If they go over 30 days, we might review those, but then it's easy to say, well, it's not your fault that this seller needs to go through probate. So there's certain KPIs. So that transaction coordinator might be able to track the average time it takes to close a deal that doesn't have any issues. And then that can be a number that she can reference to say, look, when I started, it took us 35 days to close deals. Now it on average takes us 30 or something. So I think that, what I'm kind of looking to do is those kind of personnel KPIs. Those I can use to make sure that people are getting things done as they're supposed to be getting done. At the same time, before I ever have to micromanage them, I think it makes sense for them to have a buffer day or a buffer 2 days or something, where it's now a flag on their dashboard that says this thing has officially gone, too long. You should follow up on it or something like that. Where if it goes for 3 days and something still hasn't happened, they haven't taken action on it, that seems to be, to me, something where a manager should get involved and say, hey, it's been 3 days past when we expected this photographer to tell us that he's finished his photos, and you haven't followed up with him. So now we don't know if he's even done photos yet. Those kinds of things could be helpful to make sure that we don't start, taking too long on our due diligence before, we're ready to go to title or things like that. So yeah, I think that you need your KPIs, like how much direct mail are we sending? What's our response rate? What's our average, deal numbers looking like? Especially those leading KPIs, like the marketing dollar that has to be spent. That's something that needs to be managed. And then there's the management KPIs, where it's, hey, are these people following up? If we have an acquisition manager and they're not calling people back within a day, that's something that we need to start talking about. So I think you did a great job explaining the two types. But you're right. I want to have a buffer day there where it pops up on their dashboard like, hey, you probably should have hit this already. And then they can go address it. And if they don't address it, then we have a management type issue where we should come in and say, hey, what's going on with your dashboard? This was flagged for you yesterday and it didn't get hit. How can we make this more evident to you? Did you just not see it? Or is there something more that we're having an issue with?
And I wonder just to follow up on that. And I've had these kind of deeper conversations around this before, because it's an area that I'm concerned with. It's an area that I think weirdly a lot about the differences between flags and KPIs, right? One is a notification that you need to do something. The other is an understanding of how performance has been over a historical period of time, which should give you insight into what to expect or what to change. And I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if sometimes KPIs aren't used enough at the personal level, i.e., like your acquisitions or whatever, to inform gaps or problems in the process. I think we often, and I'm not, by the way, I'm not pointing my finger at you here, but I think as a general rule, a lot of people use KPIs as the stick to beat or the it's sort of the, oh great, you're ahead of you're in the green, oh man, that's clearly everything's great, and like or you're in the red, you're clearly an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think KPIs, which should give you a historic view of the balance, are great opportunities for your team to use them to tell you where things aren't also right in a process because it's very easy sometimes to apply a KPI and say, well, you're not meeting those KPIs. And actually what it sometimes is that the process is not going to allow them to do that in a way that's going to be efficient. And there is a balancing there.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that is a really interesting one. And it isn't, there's no there's no one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
Every business is going to have to kind of figure that out a bit, but it's a fascinating one.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that kind of links all the way back to what I had mentioned earlier, where when things aren't getting done, I like to point to the process first. Because I think if you go to your employee with the mindset of this KPI wasn't hit, this wasn't done, what's wrong? And then you find out, well, it's because the lead that they're not getting back to within a day is in a different application. We should probably put that in the one that they look at every single day. You kind of look like a jerk. So I always come from just like a place of curiosity as like why. It's not why didn't you do this? It's why, I'm curious what was going, what were you looking at that led to this type of thing? Or let's go, hey, can you check the procedure? And then that always comes back with a point of learning, and nobody's feelings get hurt and everything, like the process gets better. So I just think as just general management practice, you got to come from a place of curiosity and presume from the start that it's a systemic problem and not a personnel problem, because we hire people because we know a lot about them through our, like I said, personality tests and those DISC profiles and all that stuff. The type of people we hire are the type of people that fit our culture, and they work hard and they want to do well. So everybody's doing their job to the best of their understanding, and if it's not getting done correctly, perhaps I didn't frame it correctly in the first place, and they think that they executed it properly. So it's not that they're negligent,
not bad
or incompetent.
It's there's a disconnect there
that's what we're trying to find. Yeah, we're not trying to put blame on people. We're not trying to say you did this wrong. It's our process clearly isn't good enough. Like that's the first place that we go to. Let's improve that clarity. Let's add some help text. Let's put this in front of your eyes more evidently through color or a Podio app dashboard or something. And then we'll stop that from happening again. And it's those course corrects. And I think approaching your errors and problems like that staff is going to particularly respond well to, and like nobody's feelings get hurt. And more importantly, the process gets improved, and then that problem doesn't happen again. So I'm totally with you on that.
Well, and to bring it all back full circle to Podio, and how Podio is helping your business. When we think of this whole conversation around, your business model being a very sort of transactional, volume-based one, process-based one, but also people-based one, where, communication streams and process needs to be followed, and giving people guide marks and roadmaps, and also making sure that the right information is collected. All of this comes together to show where Podio has been a really good fit for you, because, I can't think of any other system where all of these different vectors we've just been talking about can happen in the way you want them to happen. I can't think of it. And I know I'm a bit of a Podio cheerleader. I'm also a critic at times when I get fucking pissed off about performance and all that. But when it all comes down to it, listening to everything we've just talked about today and all these different points, there's just nothing that can do these things in the same way. Like,
yeah, 100%. I think if you go back and you listen to this podcast, just think about how many times like we've just made a minor tweak. We've added a button, we've changed a color, like we've added a hyperlinked text. Like I said, we can customize the help text that pops up on a field. I can add a little help button underneath it that they could click on, which will put a hyperlink into the comments section, which takes them to a Google Doc or a procedure. So that's level of customization. It just I don't think it exists anywhere else. And
customization, twinned with automation. And that's precisely. that is the knockout fucking punch. Is I can drop a new button on with a color on it, and then I can go over to GlobyFlow and I can go, now this button does these 15 things. And, and your system, you have done a great, yes, there's no question that my team is obviously working with you right now. And we do a lot in your system and all that, but you also did a lot of stuff and you were able to get it to a very mature point yourself without, by just figuring it out. And I think that's also something people should take away from this. Is that, I said earlier, there's benefit to working with people external, and I think there is. It's also great to know that you were able to take this system to a very high level, and that it's running your business on your own.
Yeah, I think that's been super helpful. I did a lot for years before I came to you guys, and
really well.
Yeah, thank you. And so, I don't have huge software development experience. I was aerospace engineer. So like my coding is like MATLAB and like things like that, where it's like, it's very light coding, but like I understand coding logic, if then statements and how things generally should work and the structure of defining, variables and stuff. So I'm far from a software developer, but, GlobyFlow or Citrix PWA, that, is very point and click. So like you can do a lot from that. And this past year, as I'm hiring and I'm training, I've, when Christmas came around and you guys were like, hey, you can buy, a billion hours of software support or whatever. I was like, yeah, I'm making the conscious decision to, write a check and say, you guys, here's, 200 hours, or I forget how many hours I paid or I pre-purchased. Because even though I can do a lot of this stuff myself, and I suggest that people do start that way, is 100%. Add things yourself, understand how it works, because there's a lot of simple stuff that I just don't need to bug you guys for. Like if I need to add a button and that button creates a comment and a hyperlink, like you want to just know how to do that simple stuff, but you also want to know when I might be messing up your stuff. But at this point of my career, it's like, yeah, I can do a lot of that development stuff. There's a lot that I can't do. And you guys do that higher end stuff super well, but it's nice just to be able to, do the little things myself. And then when I'm like, it'd be really cool if X, Y, Z could happen, but I have no idea if that's even possible. And I just write a ticket. I'm like, hey, could you guys like structure something like this? And you're just like, oh yeah, we could do that. And then you guys do a really cool flow and everything works. So yeah, being able to do the small stuff yourself, I think is really important. And then at a certain point, you have to know when it's important to hand it off to someone else, because, my time is better spent improving a process or training an employee than it is doing software development. So there's a trade-off there, but I think people really do need to just get in there and tinker around. If someone's looking to start in Podio, it's just get there, put all the fields in the right location that you want, start messing around with GlobyFlow.
Look at some YouTube videos.
YouTube, exactly.
Listen to a podcast like Supercharged with Jordan Samuel Fleming. And,
yeah, I know a good one.
And but I think your point, I think the point is really valid. I think everybody should be educated enough, even if they're engaging a company like ours. I think you should be educated enough to understand what we're doing, even if you can't do it. Because the dirty secret is I can't do it either. I don't know fucking half the things my Sandra and Magic and Lenny and Andrew do. I'm just like, oh, okay, looks great. But I'm educated enough, right? Like I started out in doing it. And as yourself, but we all have to decide where our time is best spent. And the question is, are you a real estate company that's meant to make money, or are you a Podio, or are you a Podio guy? And
Exactly.
and there's a balance there, but I do think it's critical that people have a base understanding of what's going on in the system. And I really think people should just get in there and start, get in there and give it a shot. And then once you've built the first version and it's interesting, but not as good as you want, well, then you can think about it.
Yeah. And through that beginning, doing it yourself and writing a little bit of the PWA stuff and some of those flows, once you've done that, you can then start to speak your language. So like when I ask for a support ticket, I can use every single word that's correct to say, I want when this application has this item in this field and this multi-line text field, I can use all of the right words. And then I know that, Sandra and those folks they're just going to get it done. Versus if I'm just like, hey, when this button happens, I just want magic to happen. And I don't know how to tell you that. I don't know what's going. But so like and the same thing, when Sandra comes back and she shows you the back end that she's done, she's like, hey, I created this flow. It does these kinds of things. I can recognize that, when I click a certain button, something's going to happen, and I understand why it's happening. I think without that understanding of the why, I think you could be setting yourself up for a lot of frustration because you don't have the foundational understanding of, when things are happening, this is why they're happening, or logically they might be happening because of these triggers changing. So getting in there, understanding it yourself, I think goes a long way, even when you're not doing it yourself anymore.
I 100% agree. Listen, Matt, I've kept you even a little longer than I think I originally promised you. And I really appreciate it. It's been I always enjoy speaking with you, and it's been fascinating to get your insight. Just to round this off, can you just make sure you tell everybody, obviously you're in real estate, you buy and sell land. Just give a little shout out about your websites or where people can find you, what markets you're in, in case people are listening and they're looking for opportunities.
Yeah. So I think, at this point, we try to stay really focused and avoid what, is commonly referred to as like shiny object syndrome, like doing things outside of your core competency. So, as far as opportunities and things like that go, I think that we almost prefer just to completely control our marketing by sending direct mail to the markets that we completely understand. But what I think, could be good is just networking with other people who are building businesses and who are building systems and teams. And like, that's what's next for me. So if anybody wants to get a hold of me, I'm on Bigger Pockets as a real estate forum. I think that would be a great place just to reach out, have a conversation. I'm looking for people who are building, scaling companies to kind of have some, conversations with and develop and grow like that. So I'll go ahead and I'll email you, my Bigger Pockets, profile ID. You can put that in the show notes. Yep. And then they can just find me there. I think that's just the easiest thing. And, happy to talk to people. I think that everybody gets further together. So those kinds of conversations are always interesting to me. And I think that's probably just going to be the best for us is let's just get in contact. The people who are listening to this are going to be, the types of folks that are similar to me in mindset, right? They're building their systems. They're, taking it seriously versus, just kind of the one man show type things potentially. So I'll go ahead and I'll get you that and happy to chat with anybody.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Matt, thank you so much. And everyone listening, please remember to like, share, and give us a review on all of these different, iTunes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It really does help spread the word out. And Matt, it's a pleasure as always. Thank you so much and have a fantastic week.
Thanks for having me. I'll talk to you later.
You've been listening to Supercharged with Jordan Samuel Fleming. Subscribe today on iTunes, Google Play, or Spotify for your weekly dive into how you can supercharge your business by making it powered by Podio. Be sure to check out our website, wearegamechangers.com, where you can learn more and arrange a 30-minute call with Jordan to help you understand how Podio supercharges you.